Justin Ball, thank you so much for being here this morning and taking time out of your busy day to talk with me. Quick intro for you. You're a retired Green Beret who's now focused on counseling and psychotherapy. You and your wife, Angela, served 23 years on active duty. You got 3 kids. They're 18, 15, and 12. So it's a good number. You can boost those
Times,
numbers
man.
up. You went to grad school at the Ohio State. I saw you put the emphasis on the. So I'll say it like you said it. Where you got your master's in social work, and you're a licensed clinical social worker, and you have a private practice in Pinehurst, North Carolina. And today we're going to be talking about family systems and couples. And I think that's pretty important because we're not ancillary in our healing process. There's a whole family unit that goes around us, and we've talked about that in the past. So I'm really interested in hearing your take on it, and your approach and how we can heal as a collective unit. And I think that's awesome. My first question for you:
Yes.
how do you go from Green Beret to a therapist?
We were going to dive right into all the clinical stuff, you know. That's a really good question. Yes. So there is kind of a track that makes sense a little bit, you know. I was a special forces medic for my whole career, and I served in a unit where I was really a medic. Even as a senior leader, I was a medic the whole time. I wasn't, a Green Beret on the team that was kind of a jack of all trades. So I did this kind of special job where I was only doing medical stuff. And then when I was a senior leader doing that, families in crisis, people getting in trouble, wheels falling off as they do in every unit in the military, and I'm part of the response to that. And usually I was like punitive guy, like, hey, you screwed up royally and this is how you're going to be punished or whatever. And I got to interface with our behavioral health team, and they were, it didn't matter whether they were a PhD psychologist, PsyD, a clinical social worker, whatever. They were all really good and they were helping these people. And I was like, man, I'm a SF medic. I did my undergrad and basically pre PA, because it's like every 18 deltas, like pretty much, I'll go to PA school when I'm done. And I was like, man, that's really fascinating what they're doing. And so I just started asking questions, and it's like, man, I never would have gone to a social work program. Never. But there's a number of reasons why I chose social work, but it just clicked. Like this is a very cool, applicable NCO skill set where, I define good leadership as an NCO as genuinely caring about people, like genuinely giving a crap about your people and focusing on them, and you're really down and in, and officers usually kind of up and out focused. So it really was a good bridge, and I was kind of tired of clinical primary care type medicine at that point, and trauma and all that stuff. I was very into it, So it was a big switch where I'm going to put all that stuff that I invested heavily in the back burner, and really I've let it all go, and then dive into this field, which is definitely female dominated, especially social work as opposed to licensed professional counselor versus psychology, PsyD. Like this is a female dominated field. It's very, very imbued with liberal ideology, and I came from 23 years of pretty conservative ideology, and so you're like, wow, it's a huge adjustment. Man, I've gotten to see all these different perspectives, different angles, different points of view on things, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now, and I really enjoy it. And it's a lot of NCO stuff. Not I have the answers and I'm sharing them with you, but working through problems with people and saying, man, something comes to the door, somebody's family has a family emergency, their lives are falling apart, and you're like, hey man, how do I support you? It's not like you have all the answers, but you're there, and the Army gave me really good wiring for that.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely think you have a really good approach, and like you said, it's uh, a female dominated space, and so it was nice. Like when we met, it was post my psychedelic experience, and so we were going through some stuff and unpacking everything, and it was nice to be able to speak to someone that spoke my language, knew what I had been through, and wasn't just, someone that had never experienced it themselves. Um, and so that was refreshing for me. Um, Family systems. Talk to me like I'm a 5-year old because I looked it up and I'm just like, oh, I see diagrams, I see theory, I see all this stuff. I'm not going to pretend to come in as any type of expert in this. So I'm a 5-year old. What is a family system
Okay.
therapy theory?
Yeah. So, well, let's touch on this, and then I'm going to walk it back a little bit. Because I was thinking, hey, I love family systems, but it's pretty nerdy, and I geek out on it, and I really want to keep your listener in mind that there's probably people listening, and they're like, hey, there's a episode focused on marriage, family, something like that. Give me the goods, and I think I'm going to lose them real quick if I'm like, well, systems is an adaptation from engineering and complexity and whatever. Um, but on the complexity thing, I think that's the key takeaway from systems is saying, hey, this is not simple, it's complex. And the engineers taught us don't treat complex systems like they're simple. And when we do that, we get into trouble. So recognize complexity. And if you're going to engage with complexity, there's rules to it, you know? And what's really beautiful is that I can just imagine the conversation that happened in the faculty lounge somewhere where these engineers were talking about systems and the psychologists were listening, and then they go, wow, that's you're talking about people, you're talking about relationships and families, like that is enormously complex stuff. Perhaps we could learn from you. And I talk with my brother-in-law who's a Ford engineer about this, and it is fascinating. And I'm not reducing families to machines or something like that, but the care with which you approach an industrial problem with a Ford assembly line or something, you got to be really careful, man. You make a modification here, it's going to affect that. You got to be really aware of all these different feedback loops going on. Then the question, what is this thing for? Like, this is really one of the benefits of systems is it makes you say, okay, I think I've got a system in front of me. What's it supposed to do, and is it doing its thing, or has it morphed into something else where it's now unrecognizable and you're like, yeah, is this a marriage? What the heck is a marriage? And then what if you and I disagree on what a marriage is? Oh, yeah, that's really complex, or a family, what's the, and I like the word telos, and I think it's Greek and it means sort of end state or end, or people will throw purpose on there, but really it's sort of purpose and end state of what this thing does. So, like, what's the telos of a family? And that's a scary question to dive into. What is this thing? What's it supposed to do on a very human level? And man, when you to dovetail this into just the military lifestyle, is the military lifestyle congruent with what a family is supposed to be and what a marriage is supposed to be? And if your eyes wide open to that and you're accepting the risk that comes with a military lifestyle, you can mitigate it. And I'm using the army speak now about mitigating risk and whatnot. But man, if you're not eyes wide open, or a couple hasn't really figured this out of what the heck is this marriage supposed to be, what's our family supposed to be, you can see how the wheels come off real quick over the course of 6, 7 years. Next thing we're not turning toward, we're turning away. It's like, how did this happen? But systems kind of asks us to come back to these central questions of like, okay, the engineer would ask, what is this machine that's very complex? What's it supposed to do? Is it doing its thing? Which, I mean, that sounds like, you know, oftentimes you can't simplify it that much, especially with a marriage and a family. But I think we can point at it. I think we can point out those things and say, hey, it ought to look something like this. Yeah. What do you think? What are your thoughts, Brandon?
The biggest thing that comes to me is when you look at the marriage family system, it's like you said, the husband and the wife have to determine, what does this look like for us? Does the military disrupt that? Because I was essentially married to the military. That was my spouse. And I explained to Sarah multiple times throughout my career, I signed a sheet of paper. I signed multiple sheets of paper saying I am property of the United States government. And if I don't do what they tell me to, I'm going to get Article 15s. If I don't show up when they tell me to show up, all these things, like I don't really have a say. And so the spouse that I chose and before God became one with, she got put on the back burner for 20 years because I had this other spouse that I had signed my life away to. So, how did those two mesh and how do you reconcile that either during your time in the military or post?
Yeah. Well, this is a great segue into right back into systems. One attribute of like a complex system is parts and boundaries. You are a teenage son. You do this. I am your father. I'm responsible for this. And when you get into language, like, well, this is my son and he's my best friend, that usually raises everybody's eyebrows. And they're like, I don't know if that's a good idea. There's a pretty careful boundary there. And I would say boundaries are rules, expectations, um, plans, left and right limits that kind of help a system be a system. Well, the military is a complex system and it has expectations and rules for you. And a marriage is equally as complex, and so is a family. And what I've noticed is that competing agendas or competing expectations. I can be a good soldier because I volunteered for a TDY that they needed it. Somebody bailed last minute and it's like, you know what? I can do it. I'm going to give up my kid's birthday to go TDY and cover for this person who got sick or whatever. And they're like, good boy. Then you go home and you're like, hey, babe, I had to. Well, I didn't have to. I volunteered to go do this thing and miss our son's birthday to cover down for somebody who's sick. Man, look at the competing. You've got two very different complex systems here. And now you are getting pulled in these two different directions and you're winning at work and losing at home, or winning at home and losing at work. And I know it's not that binary, like you're either winning or losing, but trying to maintain that balance is really difficult. And I think we can acknowledge that. And the military does the best it can, I think, with retreats and a lot of chaplain stuff is like kind of helping people navigate this the best they can. But uh, let's be honest, it's it's not fair. You're trying to be a really good husband and father, and you're trying to be a really good soldier. And there's not overlap. There's too much overlap there of different expectations for you. And you're gonna step on toes. Like that's, I think, a part of that lifestyle. But I think if people know that and they're aware of it and they're not expecting to be perfect in both places and they can have dialogue and discussion about it, I think you're gonna navigate it as good as you possibly can, you know? Yeah. What are you thinking?
I look at the amount of people that probably are not having those difficult, hard conversations, and there's unmet expectations. And that's probably why the divorce rate is so high within the military. Um, Sarah and I were fortunate. The way she was raised made her a very strong, independent woman who was essentially like, I don't need no man. I can do this all on my own. And for 20 years, she thrived in that role of I can be gone, I can do all these things. And she was perfectly fine. At least she said she was perfectly fine sitting at home, taking care of the kids, working a job, leading the household. And then I would come home and have to refine my role. And it worked for a period of time because we had our roles that we were filling. But then post military, it all changed because now I don't have to leave anymore. And now there's not this other commitment that's pulling me away. And so we had to redefine what our roles were within our marriage, within the household. She's used to planning everything, she's used to disciplining everybody. And now I'm home going, I'm the man, I'm the husband. This is my role. And we've had to have some very hard conversations to redefine what our marriage looks like post military. And I think it's so hard, and I don't think people have the conversations that need to be had, and they quit, and that's
Yeah.
really unfortunate because then when you do look at the family system of it's me and my wife, and then here's the kids, it's the impact that my decisions within the military have on my spouse, and then the impact that me and my spouse have on our children, and it's just this reciprocating cycle of like trauma and uh, issues, and it's difficult. I guess this is why people go to therapy and sit in your office for an hour and
Well,
try to unpack it.
I love how you're unpacking it. This is very real, and wouldn't it be nice if, the military was like, "Hey, we totally understand marriage and family. Just utilize these resources and everything will be fine." You know? It's just not, one thing I get to see from this angle now, so here I am, doing psychotherapy, couples counseling and whatnot. Couple comes in, um, it's not fair. The military lifestyle, it's just not fair. When you really look, you pan way out and you look at the whole thing, especially in the special operations culture, you know, because your job is requires a lot of sacrifice, got it, but it's swoopy and cool and highly regarded in society, and there's honors and accolades and all that stuff. And it's also true that you couldn't do it alone. All the stuff they say at retirements, babe, I couldn't do without you. I appreciate you so much. But she's always going to be back burner to this kind of shiny object lifestyle. And this is not a comfortable place to be. And so a lot of bitterness and resentment comes through the door. And I think it's fair. It makes sense a lot of the time. And we'll try to explain it away. Like, well, you know what you were getting into, and it requires sacrifice, and that's what we got into. And it's like, yeah, well, it still creates damage. It's still really unstable in that system. The military lifestyle is just inherently a destabilizing factor in this thing that we're trying to do. And I think a family, a couple, and a family, especially, I would hope a family of faith has this model, this idea in their head. We ought to look something like this, and then now they've got something to come back to and course correct to as the hits start coming in and whatnot. But I think, as you retire and transition out of the military, the hardest conversation, I think, is okay. Um, in most cases, I got mine. Like, I had this cool thing. What about you? And I, it doesn't go well when guys become Mr. Mom for the most part, for a lot of reasons. Like, let's just be honest. You can do it. You could become a Mr. Mom. But there's wiring, experience, knowledge, and hormonal profiles that that kind of matter. If you don't have much oxytocin in your system to begin with, you know that matters. So I think that hard conversation is a necessary one where you can address the unfairness of the whole thing head on, and say, how do we want the rest of our life to look? So on this, I think a very useful psychological principle that I took away from this career that I just want to pass to all your listeners comes from, Carl Jung way back in the day. They don't even call it psychology; they call it Jungian analysis. But Carl Jung talked about viewing the arc of life in the first and the second half of life, and this is a pretty new concept for a lot of people. Because in America we're like onward and upward, and Jung is like, well, we're dying. We got married and we're on our way out. You know, uh, maybe we can be really deliberate in the second half of our lives about how we're going to do things and making changes. And then you sort of like midlife crisis, which happens to coincide really well with when people retire. And a lot of people feel like the wheels are falling off at that point. They're like, God, what is going on? I have no, I've got retirement coming in, and like, why do I feel like this? Well, Jung, I think, would say, I'll just put words in his mouth. He's no longer with us, but he would say, great, good. Like, let's really lean into this. This is a very hard conversation. What do we want the rest of our life to look like? And are the expectations for a 20, when we were 20 and when we were 30 and when we were 40, are those the same as when we're 50 and 60 and 70 and 80? What does a marriage look like at 20 and 30 and 40? What does a marriage look like that's 60 and 70 and 80? And those are hard questions, but they're good ones. And then you've got this input going in where you're deliberately approaching the second half of life. And then you get into conversations that I fascinating conversations in here with older couples. Talk about intimidating when an older couple comes in their 70s and I'm on but it really does put you in, journey with you mode, as opposed to, listen, I'm a wise old sage. Like, yeah, right. But you're just kind of walking with these people, conversations around dying well. Like, those aren't first half of life conversations.
Yeah.
Older people, what do we want it to look like as we're going out? What do we want the effects to be on our extended family? And man, it's a really fascinating and a very precious thing to hear older people talk about what that's going to look like. But it is a good reminder that conversations eventually need to change. Expectations need to change. I love the example you kind of give of, you and Sarah having these, apparently we're going to have some hard conversations about my expectations now that I'm retired. And, she's a very successful businesswoman, and did your plans nest into that? Do you kind of go do your own thing? And dude, but you guys did. You guys had some hard conversations.
Yeah, they were very difficult because her expectation was I allowed you to do whatever you wanted to for 20 years, pursue your goals and your dreams, and you accomplished everything you wanted to. And the unspoken expectation was you get out, now it's my turn. And so I remember about a year out from retirement, I said, hey, when I get out, I'm going to do this contracting stuff and I'll make a lot of money. And she goes, no, you're not. You're not doing that. And I was very taken aback because I'm like, who are you to tell me what I'm going to do with my life and my career? And her expectation was, I waited for you. I let you do whatever. And now you need to be home. You need to be a father. The Army can't tell you you have to go on this deployment or this TDY trip. And I looked at it as I made garbage money for 20 years. Now it's my turn to make that, you know, high paying contract. And this is what I want to do. It's the only skill set that I have. And she's just like, no. And now those conversations weren't properly had at the time because we didn't understand how to talk to one another and appropriately explain it to one another, what we were thinking and feeling. And so they were very difficult of me feeling like she has resentment. You talked about that. She's got resentment from 20 years of being put on the back burner. She doesn't want to be on the back burner anymore, and she shouldn't be. But I don't know how to be a stay-at-home dad. I don't know how to do anything other than what I was already doing. And so it's taken a long time, but the thing that got us through it was just refusing to give up on each other and refusing to quit. Um, from your perspective, do you think it's harder on the marriage during the military or post military?
Oh, it's a good question. Oh, my cop out answer is it all depends, Brandon. Mar- Marriages are complex systems,
Yeah,
but really,
clearly.
um, I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to really think about that. I think that the challenges are different. I mean, I've my military service wasn't that long ago, so I look back and I cringe at a lot of the decisions we had to make and dumb decisions I made and how we would do things differently. And we're still, relatively new into the retired thing. And these are hard conversations too, you know. Um, but I think I think one of the things I did not appreciate about what my wife was doing day in and day out, and it was hidden in plain sight right in front of me, was household operations. And how like I hated being an ops NCO, an ops sergeant major, where you have to care about everything in that role. Like no one wants to do that job. And if you're good at it, you just get rewarded with more crap. And like I need you to worry about the brand new baby in third platoon. And I also need you to worry about so and so's retirement coming up. And we've got the long range training calendar meeting coming up this week. And then we've got this thing going on and we've got a visit from so and so. Oh, and by the way, we go to war in April. And you're like, my God, and it burns you down. And I feel like that is household ops, and I think I walked into like, hey, I'm here. I'll help out. What do you want me to do? And like, and I did not appreciate how complex that is, about like running a household. And I think my goodwill also overstepped and created more problems. I had unrealistic expectations for myself, and I think I needed to get put in my place there. Like, look, as much as you want to do this, you're just going to make it more difficult, So I run this thing. Let me show you how it's done, And man, there was a lot of really good dialogue there, but and this is where I go with this fairness thing, right? There's It's not fair that I didn't really get that. Like I'm deploying and doing these things that are dangerous and swoopy, and you're at home, doing mom stuff. Oh my God, man. When I retired, my wife is like, hey, I need you to pick up the kids these dates. I got an Excel spreadsheet of what kid at which school when and what carpool. And man, one of the first big mistakes I made was being late for school pickup. Like, I'll get there when I get there, like a good SF guy. Like, it'll be fine. And like, there's one teacher out there with a cranky look on her face, and my kid's embarrassed, I'm like, and I was just like a few minutes late, but my wife was like, yeah, you can't. Like, it's a no fail thing, man. We look like idiots. We look like irresponsible parents because you're late to pick our kid up. And I was like, well, I didn't know, I didn't like, well, you should have known. And it's just like one little glimpse into, okay, there's so much going on here that I did not appreciate. And, if being an operations NCO burns you down mentally and emotionally, just running a household is going to do the same thing. And like, we really ought to see that for what it is and really appreciate it, and be real careful about stepping into it and be like, Dad's here now. We can divvy up responsibilities, and it's like, oh man. So I think that's another really difficult conversation, is managing the expectations of what you think you can provide and how you're going to mesh into that with retirement. And maybe your wife expects that you're going to pick up a massive share of this thing. And you're like, no, I was going to start a new career, but man, those are it. What you're talking about. Those are the hard conversations.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is because I remember back when the war kicked off, uh, back in like 2005 it was. We did a year-long deployment, and guys were going home for their 2 weeks R&R, and their wife was just gone. Had packed up all their stuff. One guy went home, his truck was in the driveway, his keys were in the driveway, and the locks were changed. And so, like, I can wrap my mind around that of like, okay, war is hard, life is hard. You guys couldn't manage it. I understand that. But to see so many couples make it, you know, 10, 15, 20 years through all the crap, and then a year or two post retirement, they're divorced. And it's like, how did you get through what I deemed the hardest time and be okay and then get out and then just give up on one another? And we've seen, Sarah and I have seen a lot of couples that have said the 2 years post retirement, probably even the 1 year pre and then the 2 years post, uh, it's harder than anything else they had to go through. And I don't know if that's when all the resentment comes out, all the unmet expectations get highlighted. Um, I've just always been very curious as to why that is, and I've seen some of it within my own marriage. Of there's been some really hard times, but divorce was just never an option for us, and that was just how we were raised. But yeah, that's why I asked. It's
Yeah.
how can you
You
get
know,
through it?
and one observation from this job is, um, we want root causes, and most of the time it's just not clear, and it makes us say, "Oh man, the divorce rate in SOF or the divorce rate in the military or whatever, we got to get after some root causes." And you can make some useful attempts there. But man, every person I talk to is so unique and so different. Every couple, two totally unique people, that marriage, has all sort of nuance to it. Military families, they're so different. Um, so you can take sort of a root cause approach, you know. Let me just get rid of that message. You can take a root cause approach, but I liken it to, like, uh, post combat stuff. It's TBI, it's PTSD, it's toxic inhalation, it's like whatever, and you can just chase your tail. So I got a message here for listeners. All right. And that's just about basic things. If your listener wants to take one thing away from today, it's not the systems thing. It's relationship. Um, if we focus here, I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't matter what a root cause is, but we do know where the medicine is. And the medicine is in healing relationship. We could speculate about why different couples split and whatnot, but I think the message is to, tread lightly on why a couple is having trouble, and don't jump to conclusions and make assumptions. It was the military. It was, there's just so many different things that can affect it. Well, on the basic side, I'm a huge fan of this, Brandon, because I was a medic and I did so much advanced training, and like I never used any of it. I mean, we were in war for 20 years, and like I did super advanced training, and I put some tourniquets and some bandages on some folks, and like that's where we made our money, and a lot of times it was, a first responder putting a tourniquet on that saved the whole day. And like, yeah, the medic was important in evacuating the casualty and like managing the whole situation. Great. But you could see how, giving IVs dropped off as like a first responder skill. Like no one cares, man. I don't know anyone whose life was saved because they got an IV on the battlefield, but it was this swoopy, shiny thing. Like, I can give an IV. So I think applying that to marriage, is like, what are the basics of, of a relationship, So I'll plug the Gottman system. And if you have a couple listening or a family, and they're like, how do we find a marriage therapist? Maybe we can kind of get into that a little bit. Uh, but the Gottman system, and you don't need to find a Gottman certified therapist, but the Gottman system is so good because it's basics. And it's like, hey, we should probably be able to do the basics really well. And if we do, it's going to forego a lot of problems. We might not be the best marriage ever and the best communication and the best family dynamics, whatever, but we really ought to be doing these basic things, you know? And like, here's the book, right? Seven Principles for Making Marriage Work. There's 1,000 copies in every chaplain's office in the Army. And, chaplains, counselors, psychologists, everybody gets like a little smattering of Gottman's stuff. In fact, Brene Brown had John and Julie Gottman on her podcast, a couple episodes. I mean, it was really good. And what was cool is, John Gottman's a research psychologist. He's not a clinician. Julie is a clinical psychologist. They ended up getting married, and they get really vulnerable on the podcast about their marriage. And you're like, yes, this is goodness, because you can see like how things have challenges that they've had in their own marriage, and they kind of reference their own medicine, and having to take their own medicine, which I think is really helpful. Um, but that message, I think my key message here is relationship skills. And they're not marriage skills, they're not communication skills, they're just human relationship skills. They apply to how we talk to each other, how we talk to our friends, how we talk to our coworkers, how we talk to our spouse, especially, how we talk to our children. And it's how we send and receive information. And if that's not wired well, don't be surprised if the wheels fall off. And man, we get into some bad habits. And so many people come in and they say, I don't know what right looks like. I was raised in a really crappy home. I don't know. I don't know what is with like Army Special Forces, but man, it's like the Olympics in the team room where it's like, man, my dad used to do this to me, and they're like, that's nothing, man. My dad used to do this. So there's already this background where I grew up and I developed neurological wiring around sometimes some pretty bad stuff. Now I've got to rewire this, and it's done through this careful, deliberate attention to like these small things, that are like, hey, I'm, getting really good at expressing disagreement with my wife, and it's the army on that one, right? The army culture is like, say what you mean what you say, just like cut right to the point. Don't give it any fluff. And that's a horrible relationship strategy, you know, and
Can't
it's
tell you
very
how many
good.
times I've looked at Sarah and given her the knife hand.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is what I think, this is what we're going to do. And then maybe a day or two later, after the argument has subsided, it's like I realized that that was probably not the best approach.
Eh, and it's not to say that you need to become this big softy and have pan flute music playing in the background every time you have a disagreement with your wife. And you're like, and like all the right hand gestures, like, I'd like to be vulnerable to you. No, you can still be clear and concise and loving and kind in the way you're raising a disagreement. And man, it's a skill that's not practiced. It's not, especially not reinforced in the military. Opposite communication style is rewarded for years in the military. So I think I have a tremendous amount I give couples tremendous amount of grace regarding this stuff. Because I mean, in our society in general, we don't really encourage that communication, because we're like a business onward and upward culture, like we got to get after it. I don't have time for all the details. Um, and that makes people feel unheard and invalidated and all that stuff. But then the military just piles on to that with knife hand gestures, you know, stern speech and all that stuff, furrowed brow. This is serious. We got to get after it. And I know some marriages where, who's worse about this than us is medical people. Oh my God. Because in a hospital, it's like, do what I'm telling you or people die kind of thing. And so, like, we don't have time for the details. We got to do X, Y, and Z. I'm sorry. This is coming across as rude. It's just the way we communicate. And I've noticed that healthcare providers, especially when you're in a hospital based setting, it's like, man, they're hopping and popping, making stuff happen. And there's emergencies and there's surgery going on. there's no time to mince words. And so a lot of times, I've seen it from that culture too, whether it's males or females or whatever coming in where they're like, just say what you mean what you say, be upfront. And then you've got somebody like, that doesn't, geez, is that how we're supposed to talk to each other? That
Yeah.
doesn't make me feel very good. It's kind of hurts the way you're saying that to me. I guess I appreciate your efficiency, but you are kind of making me feel like an idiot in the way you're telling me this thing. Like, thanks for your efficiency. I didn't get into this for efficiency though. I got into this to give and receive love back and forth.
Yeah. Do you see a trend within marriages? And I'm not asking, is it the man or the woman? Because I know it's very fluid, and it can be either or both at the same time. But do you see a common trend from one or the other that breaks down the communication process? Like, I can say from my own perspective, I think and I'll give you my example to highlight what I'm asking. Sarah and I learning how to communicate better. I'm a very important person. I was a Green Beret. I did all these amazing things all over the globe. I am very special. I'm very important. I literally wore a tab on my sleeve that told me how special I was. And so I'm telling you, this is how I'm going to talk to you. This is what I'm telling you to do. This is how I communicate. And my biggest thing was like learning how to humble myself, learning how to think of my partner as a partner, not as a subordinate. And gosh, we would have arguments where my oldest son would come in and be talking, and I would just tell him, "Hey, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do." And he's like, "I don't appreciate the way you're talking to me." And he said it respectfully, but I'm like, "You don't get to tell me how to talk to you." And then Sarah's like, "You were a little harsh in your language." And I'm like, "You also don't get to tell me how to communicate." And
How did that go?
it did not go very
Yeah.
well. Um, but it's like, I looked at myself as I'm too arrogant, I'm too prideful. I think I'm looking at my family as I'm the sergeant major and they're the subordinates. So, my example aside, do you see a common trend that really leads to the breakdown of communication in between spouses and the family unit?
Brandon, what you just said was wisdom born of knowledge and experience. And all I can do is put an exclamation point after what you said. And I think the necessary humbling that has to happen. And it goes back to this relationship concept of like, man, who am I in this relationship? And I better humble myself for what this really is because, man, this is I'll get like spiritual and philosophical here, but it's like, man, as a human being on the planet Earth, this is the fundamental unit of life is like me and her. And like, man, we lose sight of that so fast. And like, man, if I should be so careful with this person, not, walking on eggshells and whatever, but um, like this is really important. And God, I mean, I love the way you say that. And it's like I got into these patterns of this is who I am. And in your defense, right? It was, socially rewarded. It was neurologically rewarded. It was dopamine rewarded throughout that whole time. Like you're a big deal. People listen to you and they like it when you take control of chaotic situations by yelling, and uh you're a good soldier because your boots are shiny. Like
Yeah.
what, like all this wiring where you're like, man, this is weird. I'm looking, there's another one. That person's making fists. So now my heart rate's up because they look aggressive. Like,
Yeah.
man, all that took place over 20 some years. And then the humility to recognize it and say, maybe some of this is not adaptive to my marriage. And I need to start letting some of this stuff go. And can I transform, when I've been rewarded for 20 years for being assertive and aggressive and take charge and authoritarian, can I transform into humble, gentle, kind, respectful? Man, that's a big ask. It's a huge ask after you have 20 years of wiring, And I'm not saying, like there's no humility in a soldier or something. Um, Brandon, you're a pretty humble dude and you had to struggle with humility. Like you and I both know arrogant, egotistical a-holes. You're not one of them. And you had to come to a humility. And me too. I mean, that's one of the like, geez, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not good at this. We need to recalibrate. We need to rethink things. We can probably do this better. I don't have all the answers. And a side note is like that's all good cognitive behavioral therapy too. Like you could say like, well, that's just CBT. Okay, well, I think CBT sort of validates the reality that this marriage and this family are really, really special. And maybe humility is the stance. Maybe humility is the relationship stance that we should approach with. And by the way, the Jesus manifesto, the Jesus inaugural address, blessed are the poor, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the meek, blessed are the humble, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And the rest of the beatitudes. But I mean, I don't think he was messing around. He's not like blessed are the arrogant, blessed are the efficient and in charge.
Yeah.
Blessed are the rich. Blessed are those who think they're better than everybody else. It's like I think that the beatitudes is sort of giving us the second half of life, especially second half of life agenda, where it's like, man, I got to start transforming into a new creation here, and like, thank you for your service, Brandon. But I I want you and me to transform into more humble, kind, patient, generous people, cutting people slack, giving people grace. And that is going to grate against our souls a little bit. I think it just is. But yeah, man, boy, did
So
I
what
go on a tangent there.
good. I love it. What stops people from making that shift and being willing to make the changes that are needed within their marriage?
That's a that's a really good question. Um, I'm going to refer to phone a friend here. So, in preparation for this podcast today, because this is a really complex topic, and my instant reaction is like, "Who the hell am I to address this in front of a group?" I don't know if you have 4 listeners or 400 or whatever, but it's like, okay, better be clear on what we're going to say. So, my mentor is a long term PhD psychologist, taught at taught at a major university, did clinical work at a major university, did his own private practice, did all these different things, and could be making a gazillion dollars. And he works on post at Fort Bragg doing therapy because it's his passion. People are his passion, and he's gifted. He's really good at it. Amazing. So I hit him up and I said, "Hey, my friend Brandon's asking me about these things. I got this perspective as a Green Beret turned therapist. I'm like, what do you got? What do you got, man?" And he's like, of course it's swoopy, right? I love this guy. He's like, he's Japanese. He's Japanese American. And he's like, yeah, there's this Japanese term called kaizen. And he's like, do you know what that means? I'm like, no, I don't know what that means. And of course I feel like I should know what that means. And and Kaizen means got to be careful with this in America, but it means continuous improvement. But that's not the Japanese meaning because that sounds like we got to get bigger, stronger, and faster, and it's not. It's just it's sort of a mindset. And the way he calls it, and I got my notes here, simple, deliberate, consistent growth. And I think that's this like what you're talking about is like this humble, transformative mindset where we're keeping it real consistent. Like, am I becoming a better person? And how am I doing that? Well, um, I could probably become more and more skilled at how I disagree with my wife. you know, and I could become more and more skilled at engaging with an obnoxious teenager who's having, a temper tantrum that they ought not be having at that age, like all these things are these kind of Zen teachers, I think, that are pointing us to, okay, this is another opportunity for transformation. Right. And the army would be like, that's a leadership challenge. And we'd like roll our eyes and be like, no, it's not. It's just a freaking problem, Like, well, it's a leadership challenge. Um, but I asked my mentor to expand on like, hey, what do you mean there? Simple, deliberate, consistent growth. And he said, don't chase the shiny object things. It's the small things that add up over time. And that's where the discipline comes in, where like when and think about this as a family boundary expectation, whatever. When spouse is home, we have dinner together. And if you do that consistently and you hold each other to it, and you're not going to be perfect at it, but it's this boundary. And when you mess it up, you know what to apologize for. And when it's messed up, you know what you're forgiving when there is an apology. So it's this very clear thing in this family system. It's like, hey, this is how we do it. Um, Family game night, go to church. Like there's all these little rituals that we have that I think equate to this continuous improvement process where um, these are consistent positive behaviors in life and they're not perfect, and like, let's be honest, going to church every Sunday is not always a wonderful experience for a million different reasons, and especially like dragging kids who don't want to go. And there's all these things, but this consistency over time. And, and not to just, and we've really talked about the military lifestyle as being this very damaging thing, and I think the listeners are like, God, this is, can we even do this well? So here you've got this psychologist, my mentor, that's been dealing with military families for 20 years. And this is his message. It's really simple. Give yourselves grace, focus on these little things that make them real consistent. And, and then we got into this relationship conversation as well with my point about being really good and like valuing relationship. And, another habit here is like repair. So this connects with Gottman principles. The research says, if you don't have a repair habit in your marriage where you're not routinely admitting fault, taking responsibility for things, making apologies, good, honest, authentic apologies that are not contemptuous, like, I said I'm sorry, what the hell? Because, I get to hear that in the office here, and you're like, wow, that was the worst apology I've ever heard. Like seriously, like you think that was an authentic apology. Um, and then people receiving the apology and forgiving, like, man, that's a ton of skill set right there that can just get better and better and better over time. But I mean, it's not a tall order. Hey, you're married. Do you have a repair habit in your relationship where you routinely n- ask yourself, like, man, could I have done that better? And you don't want to overdo it, right? Or all you're doing is apologizing all day. Like, that's not good. But figuring out this appropriate, man, that is a definite marriage and family skill. And to the doc's point here, yeah, it's like, did consistent repair take place over time despite deployments and TDYs and not being home enough? And things will probably go okay if those basic things are done. You know. All right, I said a bunch there. What are you thinking?
My thought is for a long time, knowing that I had post traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, I relied on that as my excuse as to why I couldn't change.
Ooh,
Do you think that is uh, a lot of military guys, or even just anybody with post traumatic stress, they latch on to that trauma as their excuse not to get better in other aspects of their life? It's like, why do you drink so much? Well, I got PTSD. Why do you, I don't even know, do whatever you, why is there the substance abuse? Why is there the drugs? Why is there the suicidal ideations? Why is there, and it's just, I'm going to latch on to this I have something wrong with my brain. It's not my fault. I can't change. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Uh, Apparently it's a thing, you know. I think it points to defensiveness, which is, the Gottman horseman number 2 of their 4 horsemen concept, which is pretty depressing when you look at it, but also very encouraging because you're like, oh, the opposite of being defensive is taking responsibility. I should do more of that in my relationship. Yeah, like that makes total sense, not rocket science. And if you don't do it, the wheels are going to fall off. And if you do it, the wheels probably won't fall off. Man, we maybe in our fragile ego states need to defend, like when things are not well. And oh man, I forgot, it must have been a TBI moment. There's sort of the cute, like, oh, TBI, but then there's this consistent excuse of not taking responsibility for the thing that happened, and being like, hey, look, I probably got this thing. I probably, melted my brain somewhat with, explosives. And it's like, man, fine. If you break the law, you're going to go to jail. There's, the court system isn't going to be like, well, he did have a good excuse. Our court system doesn't even operate that way.
Well,
It's,
it
it,
might be
it
starting to operate that way, but we'll keep the politics out of it.
oh man. Okay. Yeah. I'm not going to touch that with 10-foot pole. But keeping it at this human level, like I'm responsible for my behavior, you know, and we tend to make excuses. We tend to explain. We want to explain why the thing happened. I want to explain why I'm in trouble or whatever, or why I had a lapse or why I did this thing wrong. And really, we want to meet the person's emotion. They're upset with us, and we want to meet them at an emotional level first. But what we tend to do is sort of like beat that back with logic. And that often is just like not received well. And it looks like, and you could be right. You might very well be right. Like, hey, I have a traumatic brain injury. And so I forgot the thing, you know, sure. And your wife's upset because you made a commitment to do this thing and you forgot. And the fact that she's upset because things aren't going well is the point. Why, explaining why this thing happened, because, I think 99 times out of 100, she's not going to go, uh, you know what? That's a great excuse. My bad.
Yeah.
I'm no longer upset, but man, this goes back to this relationship theme. I love this person. She loves me, and we're better together, you know, most of the time, I think. God, I hope so, and
Yeah.
like life is good with you in it, like all that stuff. Man, she's upset. What can I do here? And maybe just listening is what I can do here and whatnot. But man, my tendency and yours and everybody else's, and this is not a male, female, military, non-military thing. This is just people, is we just go right to explanation. Well, let me tell you why. And yeah, we got this wiring. Our whole cortex of our brain is it's very analytical, but that emotional part's underneath there. And when it's upset, it's upset. And I think if we learn the skill of meeting somebody who's upset where they're at, being present to them, sounding very therapist-y, aren't I? And being present to them, and then at the right time, you can have this conversation. But the point is, my spouse is upset, not the logic and the rationale about the thing that they're upset about. you know Easier said than done, and I think that's a massive skill that takes a really long time. I am not that good with it in my marriage, man. But I'm on the journey, you know and everything I'm preaching in here, I'm trying at home. And in fact, my wife apologized to me last night.
Wow.
She
And
got
we have it on recording too. So
Yeah,
from
dude.
a
And
male perspective,
yeah, I mean, and she was right. um so like my lower back hurts chronically, and I'm doing all these different rehab things for it. And I was like, you know what, maybe we need to change our mattress. And she was like, you know what, maybe you should stop doing jujitsu. And it was like in front of the kids, and she was like, come on. uh, that's not a good idea, and I got like warm and defensive and was like, you know, hey, that's my thing. And like, Brandon, she's 100% right. And I'm upset, you know, and, I'm a pretty agreeable person. I'm like, you know what, babe, you're right, but I was a little bit hurt at how she said it, and about an hour later, I was working on some stuff and she came in and she was like, hey, I could have done that better. And man, that meant the world to me. It was like, wow. Uh, and she sort of explained too, like, well, here's where I'm coming from. I wasn't listening. One, husband probably wasn't listening, but man, I was so moved by that, like that she noticed and bothered, and just was like, you know what? And I'm like, man, this feels like a partnership. Like this feels good. She, I feel loved in that moment because she bothered to come in and course correct. And I wasn't thinking at all that was mean and you ought to apologize to me. Not at all. I was like, well, you're probably right. And I kind of feel like an idiot. And I guess I got some hard thinking to do about, my sports habits, and maybe it's time to hang it up, all that stuff. But man, she took the time to see potential hurt and address it. And I was like, wow, this is, I'm on the receiving end of this. This is pretty cool. And it goes back to that relationship thing. I don't really remember all of what she was saying and her logic about why I should quit and whatever. I just remember this heartfelt time, and it was really simple. Probably took 4 seconds of interaction, and it, like, made my whole day.
How long do you think it takes couples to get to the point of recognizing that their words hurt and and not your specific example, but it made me think of this, like a lot of couples, this is what I think, so this is what I'm going to say. And they don't realize the impact that it has. But then taking the time to think about it, recognize, hey, maybe I could have done that better, and then humble themselves and go apologize to the partner, whether they were asked for it or not. How long does it take a couple to get like that?
Um, I don't know. uh, let's be safe and go back to the Kaizen principle. if we're if we're seeking, if you're, um, it's pretty clear that we sort of fall into these patterns, especially because no one's telling us. Like how many people before they got married went to a marriage prep program. 'Cause some people do that, but did they say, hey, if you do these things that the Gottmans identified with a ton of research, you have a 92% probability of divorce? I never got any of that. And I grew up, like my parents have a great marriage, lots of good examples, like I grew up in a very good home. Man, I still screwed it up by the numbers. And I don't know why, Brandon, but you see this thing like horseman number one. It really has to do with the way we bring things up. Is it accusation, or is it bringing up a concern? Is it tactfully bringing up a disagreement versus like a you always statement? Oh my God, you're always late. And it's like a very attacking thing. And I don't know why we don't know that. And a lot of times another sort of mystifying thing is I wouldn't talk to my kids that way, but man, husbands and wives will talk to each other that way. And it's like, man, why are we so loose with this when it's this person we love the most? And I'm sure there's tons of theory about why that's the case or something. But the point is like, we got to get really careful at this thing. So how long does it take? Well, I know, I think it took like 15 years to realize it. And my marriage was like, I could probably do better at this. And like, this isn't making things good. And what might I be doing that's not helpful? I'm like, man, I should be really good at how I talk to people. The way I talk to people at work is not the way I can talk to my wife, you know?
I'm still learning that. And you brought up the you statements. That's one thing overgeneralize my statements and I make you statements. And I don't even realize I'm doing it until an hour after the fact. And she's like, I'm upset because you said this. And I'm just like, yeah, but I I spoke the truth. And I'll just make up an example. You never clean the kitchen. And all she heard was an accusation and that she never does it. But I'm just making a statement of I'm addressing you. So I'm saying you, and I'm saying you never clean the kitchen, even though she does like every day, but it's a mess. And so I'm just overgeneralizing. And she's like, that's just so hurtful. I couldn't hear anything else you said afterwards. And I can't wrap my mind around it because I'm like, I don't think I did anything wrong. And now here we are arguing about the words that I used and how it made her feel and how she took it. And yeah, it's very hard. I get super defensive in that moment. And but it's having to take that step back and then eventually realizing like, okay, you do actually clean the kitchen a lot of the times. Maybe I shouldn't have said you never, but yeah, it's just I've been talking a certain way for so long, I don't even recognize when I do it. Um, and it's hard because I'll put a lot of thought into a statement, but just the first word that comes out of my mouth ruins that entire statement. And I don't get it sometimes. So
Man, I love that you bring up, like, thank you, Brandon. That was very vulnerable. It happens and I don't even know it. I'm just like, next thing you know, I'm like, what the hell did I say wrong? Oh, yeah, well, yeah, I guess I could have, I think that's growth. I think that is doing the work. In therapy, we're like, got to do the work. Like, what do you mean by do the work? That's the work. That's hard work. Especially, you've got ego strength. I mean, ego just means I. Just me. And you've got ego strength. And what if it's overbearing a little bit? And maybe I need to be aware of this and back it off a little bit. How do we get there? Man, I think there's this mindset of humility that you brought up earlier. It's like, how should we go about this? It's like, man, I need to have my eye on humility. Like, this is whatever I'm doing, I need to have this mindset of humility. And a humble person has the ability to look at it and see where they're wrong and say, you know what, I could have said that better. And I mean, I didn't say it, you said it. This is like, I think the core skill set here is becoming more humble. You brought up, there's the you statements thing. And I know a million, people will roll their eyes and be like, yeah, I heard all that stuff at couples counseling. And, my mentor, one of his points is we're a very information culture. Like, yep, I've heard that before. But are you doing it? And is it a skill now? And the way you describe your interaction with the kitchen scenario, that's the skill. Is like I'm becoming more and more aware, and it's getting better, a little bit better, and a little bit better all the time. To where I am catching myself. I'm still not perfect in the way I say it, but then I say it, and I'm like, oh, hey, let me rephrase that. That came out kind of crappy. Hey, remember that conversation we had about it kind of bugs me when the kitchen's all chaotic, and now you're having a very different conversation, but you brought up overgeneralizing, and this kind of goes back to just the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy. Like, we know that when people think in general about anything with overgeneralization, it doesn't go well mentally. Leads to all sorts of stuff, anxiety and depression and all this stuff. Jumping to conclusions, and for your listeners, you know, uh, a fun Google search is cognitive distortions. You'll find lists of 60, 70 ways in which human beings lie to themselves or don't slightly speak the truth about stuff. But overgeneralizing is a huge one. And it's reinforced by culture, you know, you people and, all Democrats, all Republicans, all conservatives, all liberals, and we get in this like all or nothing thinking as another cognitive distortion. And it's like, hey man, that is not, that's not just, it's not the case. It's complex. You're treating a complex thing like a simple thing. Now we're back to systems. You like how I did that, Brandon? But
yeah,
but really, Mind reading is another one. You know, I know what you're thinking this, or and that's where, or I know how you are. You're like this, and not, it's like, whoa. And a lot of those cognitive distortions are not just not correct, or not totally true. They're hurtful when you apply them to a person or a group. And it's like, easy, you know, you're kind of like, lump me into this category now. And you never clean the kitchen. Like, and there may be some truth to it, but the point is, this is my wife, this is my husband. I need to be really careful and respectful and kind and gentle in how I say this. And that's the Gottman antidote for horseman number one, which is like, if you find yourself in an adversarial accusatory pattern, gentle, gentle, soften startup. And that's not easy. Like, that is a skill to develop over time. Taking responsibility is number two. That's the antidote for defensiveness. And then horseman number three is body language, is contempt. It's rolling your eyes and all that whole, everyone's heard, 80% of communication is nonverbal. There's 80% room there for us to become really aware of like what we're doing with our hands. And man, Doug, I love what you brought up earlier. Is like, I was giving my wife the jump master knife hand. Oh man, like what? Oh, no, I was just being decisive. I said, man,
Yeah.
nobody likes getting a knife hand. And like, if I was a jumper, I don't like getting you know,
No.
it's kind of threatening. But man, becoming aware of all those little things that we do, eye rolls and smirks, and man, this social engagement system, the facial muscles, like all this, it's fascinating. And make one little smirk, and it opens up 5 different browser windows in your head about what I'm thinking. And I turn up my lip just like a little bit, and you're like, whoa, your brain just starts buzzing with what I'm probably thinking. Man, it's powerful. So all these little smirks on our face, and it's not to make us paranoid, like, uh, wait, I'm standing with my arms folded, so you probably think that I'm rejecting what you're saying, but it's just being mindful of it, and going like,
I
okay,
am very guilty of that. I went through some training years ago about reading body language, and um, I got a book called Spy the Lie, and the author of it came and spoke to us and told us all about reading microaggressions and micro. And so I've carried that with me, and I'll look at my wife, and she'll admit this. She has RBF, and I'll say something, and then I'll just immediately like look at her eyebrows, her mouth, her body language. And I'm just like, never mind, just forget it. I know what you're thinking. And she's like, you have no clue what you're thinking. I'm like, your arms are crossed, which means you're very defensive. That's a defensive posture where you're doing this and you did this and you did that. And I just jumped to this conclusion of I learned something 10 years ago that made me just dangerous enough to self sabotage everything I say and do. And now I'm putting on her what I think, not listening to what she's actually responding with. And I'm terrible with that.
rounding out the 4 horsemen, right? Which is really an awful thing to tell a couple about. It's like, oh, if you got the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse trotting around your marriage, it's got like a 92% probability of divorce. It makes people go, oh my God, I do that one and that one and that one. And they're like, oh my God. But it's like, hey, we all do these. We just culturally, whatever, humans tend to do these things. We get accusatory, we get defensive, we get contemptuous in how our body language towards things we're not happy with. And then the fourth one, is like, it's all about timing and how and when we're disagreeing, and it's, we're looking at, hey, we're starting to fight. We're going to disagree about things. Now my heart rate's going up, my blood pressure's going up, and we're escalating and noticing it. The fourth horseman is stonewalling, but the antidote is a little bit more helpful. And it's like physiologic soothing, knowing when the other partner is starting to get really pissed and recognizing it early. It's upstream. And you're going, you know what? We're escalating. We got to stop. I'm passionate about what I'm arguing. You're passionate about what you're arguing. This is going nowhere. We have to have the discipline And man, that is not easy. Like that's another skill you're developing is like, man, like I think a good marriage is, man, we had a crazy disagreement about who we were going to vote for, you know, and we recognized early this is not good, and imagine bringing this from marriage to family, modeling that for your kids, dad's a Republican, mom's a Democrat, and we vehemently disagree about who should be voted for or whatever. And wow, now you're modeling a difference in the home, and that we don't have to be on the same sheet of music for every single thing. And there's so much you could pull from that one scenario, but when you're focusing on this skill, all the fruits of it are just magnified. Where you're modeling it, the kids are seeing healthy conflict, because you really ought to stand your ground on certain things, and then recognize when you're going too far and have healthy disagreement. And we're going to outrun our headlights, but now we're recognizing like, oh, this is going in a bad direction. We got to walk this thing back. I need to calm down. You need to calm down. Let's go do our calm down things and respect what those are for each other, and have the time we agree to come back and chat again, table the conversation. There's all those little micro skills in there, but it's cool. I like it. There's these four things we can: gentle startup, take responsibility, culture of appreciation, and stop escalating before it gets out of hand, and come back and talk about it later. Like, oh, okay. I can and should do that in my marriage and all my relationships, you know? Like it's just, I think it's human communication.
One thing that Sarah and I learned years ago that we still use, not always effectively, but one thing we learned was when the argument starts to escalate to the point that we don't hear the other person anymore because we're just so worried about getting out what it is that we want to say, um, we developed a code word. And this was actually told to us by a therapist. And when the other person calls that word out, and for us, it's mistletoe because we like that movie Four Christmases. And when Reese Witherspoon calls mistletoe, it's, hey, we're done. Um, when the other person says mistletoe, that's it. The conversation stops. Nothing else gets said. And then we separate for a certain amount of time, 30 minutes, an hour, and we reflect. And it's not reflecting about why I was right and why she was wrong. It was trying to see it from the other person's perspective. Why we're arguing about politics. We'll just stick with that example. Um, why is she coming from this perspective? And then why am I coming from this perspective? And then we'll usually make a note in our phone, and then we come back at the end of whatever time. And then we say, hey, we'll oftentimes use the floor method. If we're cool headed enough to remember the floor method of, you said this, and this is what I heard. And we go back and forth and talk about it in a calm manner. But that mistletoe, taking that time out. And if we're disciplined enough to actually stop talking, because one of us always has to get the last word in. Um, I called mistletoe a couple weeks ago. We both stared at each other, waiting for the other person to say something so we could chime back in. And she just stared at me. I was like, I'm not saying a word. And she walked away. And then we came back like half an hour later. But that has been a tool that's worked for us, that when we recognize like, hey, we've gone from having a disagreement to like, we're hurting each other. Like, it's hard because it's like, I want to get this last word in. I want to make my point, but calling mistletoe and then taking that break.
Uh, well done. Man, that is solid. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's taken a while just to develop that pattern, that habit. And then it's not perfect. You guys, have continuous room for improvement there. Not a lot of people do things like that. It's not really reinforced in the TV that we watch and the movies that we see. So like it's totally doable, and it's an uphill battle. And I think maybe it's like an American thing, but it's like, are we doing this right or are we not? Instead of being able to live on this journey where this is the laboratory that's should be making us more humble, more kind, more patient, more respectful, with more awareness of boundary, you know, more awareness of how we drive each other nuts, you know, like that's, isn't that what we're doing? And like, what better way to get there than to be in this partnership with somebody where we're working through all these things, you know, man. I know we got to roll here pretty soon. Can I, I have something I want to throw in here.
Yeah,
Can I,
go for
can
it.
I, can I dive in this? So that's the process of seeking help. Man, it is, it's so hard for people. You know, like if I go on, like if you need a therapist, couples counselor, family therapy, whatever it is, there's one of the barriers is there's too much information. You know, there's like you go on, you start searching and you get inundated with people with all these credentials, and you're like, oh, you know, what do I need? So so insurance is another barrier where people think like, I should only see people who take my insurance. And man, when we're talking about especially like marriage and family, I would really second guess that, you know, because like what you're investing in, and I know it sounds like I'm making a plug for, you know, private practice, private pay therapy and whatnot. Um, but this is something that's so important that's not, it's if they're trying to squeeze it into the medical model, which is like, oh, just go find a doctor that takes your insurance and they'll do 12 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy or Gottman stuff with you. And like, no way, there's no way. And we have all this research that shows the therapeutic relationship is the biggest factor that matters versus the system being used, the modality being used. People are like, oh, I need EMDR for my trauma. And it's like, sure, fine. But I hope you and your therapist really work well together. Because if you don't, the EMDR is it's not going to do anything, you know. And this gets twice as hard with marriage counseling or couples work because one spouse might really like the therapist, and the other one's like, yeah, I'm just kind of along for the ride. So my message to your audience is don't be limited by who takes your insurance. And with providers are out of network, it means that you pay up front and then you bill they give you a bill and you send it to your insurance. Your insurance reimburses you. It's not bad. You know, it's not that like you're either in network with my insurance or I have to pay out of pocket. It just means you got to pay out of pocket up front and then you submit it to your insurance because they're not contracted with your insurance, you know. But a barrier to marriage counseling is that um, technically marriage counseling is not covered by insurance. You know, usually the workaround is you just diagnose one of the people with anxiety because it is sort of an anxious thing or adjustment disorder or something, and then we kind of, you know, fumble through that. But technically, you know, the Z code of like marital distress is not a reimbursable thing. You know, so people are like, oh God, you know, man, marriage counseling is expensive. It can be like 150, $200 an hour. Well, my reaction to that from this side of the house is like, hey, this is absolutely worth the you know, worth the investment. Um, you're you're not looking for a bargain here, and shop. You know, look at different therapists, go meet with them. As part of their job is to present themselves to you, and they shouldn't want to work with you if it's not mutual. You know, there should be a rapport, and it's their job to have thick skin. And if you're like, you know what, I don't know if we're a good fit, their job is to say, okay, let's get you to who can help you, not like, oh, really? What did I do wrong? It just let it go. You know, like that's our job is to go, hey, I'm not a good fit, and it doesn't matter why, I'm just not. So let's go. Let me point you in a different direction. But it on this side of the house, so many people could use like upstream work where they're like, man, if we would have started this years ago, we probably wouldn't be in the pickle that we're in. And it makes you ask, like, dang, what's the holdup? You know, and we were talking, my wife and I were talking with a couple the other day who went for like performance marriage counseling. Like, we want to do things better. And the clinician was like, you guys are doing great. What are you doing here? And but that's our mentality is like, you have to have a problem to go seek help, you know? And, you know, one formula for this would be, um, read the Gottman book. like let's be honest. Like we're not going to sit down each night and like, okay, dear, we're on chapter one, but making this commitment. And if you wanted to have a counselor that you're walking through this thing with, maybe you just have a couple of appointments where there are like these touch points with a third person, a third party that's giving you sort of these unbiased things and lots of experience. But you guys are agreeing to listen to the book, read the book, take it serious, and know what the seven principles are. Man, that would go so far with so many people. But what we do is we wait until the wheels are falling off. And then like in duress, we're trying to find a therapist and we're settling. Like, well, this person takes my insurance, so we'll just go with them. I don't really like who they are, where they're from or their background or their politics or something. You just kind of go with it. That's not a good system. And I think we could just do better as married people and family people watching out for our families and our marriages. So that's just my little soapbox from my perspective moment for your listeners.
And I think that's all well said, and I have nothing to argue against or add to. Um, yeah, I think just finding the right person, the right therapist for you is key. I have one last question, and then I'll let you go. And I don't want to go too deep because this one could lead into like a whole nother hour and a half conversation. Um, what stops people from asking for help?
The first thing that popped into my mind was Brandon spoke about humility earlier. You know, man, that's a barrier. It's like, look, I don't want to. I don't feel like it. Now, I will say this. When people are really depressed, they know they should ask for help and they just don't feel like it. And because I've been there, and I've had people say, bro, why didn't you call me? And I was like, yeah, I thought about it. I knew I should, and I just didn't. I don't know, but it really kind of highlights the whole motivation thing. When you're in a bad way, you're in a bad way. So I know that's a thing. But man, the readiness, it's quite a journey. The readiness to say, hey, I think I need some help. I think we need some help here. You know, and that couple I was telling you about that went in for like, hey, we should do what we can to make our marriage better. That's a pretty humble thing to do. Is to say, I think we're doing pretty good, but I know we got room for improvement. Like, let's go. So this comes back to Brandon's message today, which is like humility. Are we becoming more humble people? And with that, I'm not saying the inverse, which is like people who don't ask for help are arrogant or something like that. But I think that's a pretty big hurdle for some folks is getting over yourself. And you know also, oh man, second to that would be perception of what therapy is,
Mm.
because it's like lotus position, pan flute music and waterfalls, and like somebody's gonna be like, hey, and talk to me in this soft voice. um it Shop around till you find what you're looking for. you know some people want that, some people desire that, but there's so many different kinds of therapy. There's like a couple of sessions, solution focused brief therapy, SFBT, where some therapists are like, I just do this. Come in, let's get after it. I only want to see you a couple times. Other people are like, I want to come in weekly and talk to you about this thing. And usually therapists will be like, yeah, I don't want to do that. But I think a barrier is the idea of what therapy is going to look like. And my encouragement there is like, go try something. If you don't like it, don't go and keep looking. Or my insurance ought to be providing me with the thing and I don't like any of my insurance options. It's another barrier, where I want the VA to take care of me. Like, okay, it's free, but you're going to have to get in that giant system that's responsible for helping a ton of people. So don't expect it to be amazing, when it's a giant, I don't know, kind of socialist system, you know? Yeah. What about you? What do you think is the barrier?
Uh, I think it's pride. I think within the veteran community specifically, It's we have been trained for however many years not to ask for help, that if you ask for help, you're weak. I think there's this stigma of if you go to mental health, you're going to be pulled from the team. You're seen as less than, you couldn't hack it, whatever. Um, and then I think some of it is if I go to therapy, they're going to tell me I'm the problem and I don't want to hear it. I can just argue with Sarah and we'll be fine. But when she says, hey, let's go to couples counseling, it's like, nope, I'm good. And there's probably a deep seated fear of, I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to be the problem. Everything's going to be my fault and I don't want to hear it. And I don't want to face that. Um, that's just my opinion.
Yeah. I like it. That's a yeah. Let's add that to the list.
We'll, uh, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
All right, man. See
All
ya.
right.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.